All right, Ted, thanks for doing this.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for asking.
So I thought that as we get ready to do the virtual open house this year, the Beckman open house for 2021, I thought, well, there's no better way to spend time learning about the history of Beckman. Here we are 3 decades in, going on our 4th decade, and it's a great opportunity to bring back Director Emeritus Ted Brown. It's really good to put this all in context by maybe rather than me reading your bio, which is the standard practice of doing things, just maybe you could give me a brief history from your perspective.
Yeah, I can do that. When I came here, I came in a rather lowly position, actually. I was appointed an instructor in the chemistry department. It was a time, this was 1956, and it was a time when the university was growing and they were hiring new faculty. I had good luck to be somewhat, in the terms of that time, a little bit interdisciplinary. I guess I was a good committee person. I was on a lot of committees around the campus during the unrest of the 60s. I was on the first faculty committee on affirmative action with a couple of other faculty members, and we made a little noise and caused a little trouble.
I think it was in the early 70s when you wrote your book on energy and sustainability. What drove you there?
In the 60s, I was interested enough in it, and I had read enough about it to think this could be a serious problem for society. And so one summer, I took off about half the summer, and my family and I rented a cottage up on the shore of Lake Michigan. I packed a big box full of all the reprints and other stuff that I had on that subject, and we went up to this place on the dunes overlooking Lake Michigan. We were there for about almost 2 months, and I wrote this little book in that course at that time. And I was, of course, I didn't have access to the library. I had only what I had packed, but so I brought home an incomplete manuscript, but I was able to finish it up pretty fast. Eventually, the book got published. There were quite a few schools that used it. I got a lot of satisfaction, and I certainly learned a hell of a lot by writing that book.
It's to the point that I think, you've been ahead of your time on many instances. And that just is an example of, I think before this was on the general society's radar, you were already latched on and realizing some of the, roads that we were heading down.
It's not a subject, it just really sort of creeps up on you because of so much of it is invisible. So that book got me, and then I took sabbatical leave in 1972. I had a sabbatical leave at the International Meteorological Institute in Stockholm. And that was the year in which the first international conference on the environment was held in Stockholm. And it was a wild and woolly conference. There were students running around with protest flags all over the place. And I was right in the middle of it because the International Meteorological Institute was right downtown. And so it was an easy walk over to watch the fun.
Through the late 70s and early 80s, when Arnold Beckman was first making an announcement, or how did that all come to be that there was before the Beckman Foundation, there was maybe a hint that there might be an opportunity to do something big on campus?
Well, Arnold was an alum of U of I and a loyal alum. He was a member of the foundation board, U of I Foundation board. He came to the board meetings almost every year, he and his wife, Mabel. And so he loved Illinois. He had grown up in Cullum, which is just 70 miles north of that. And of course, by that time, he'd gotten to be quite a rich man. And so in 1978 or thereabouts, the university undertook the first big fund drive, and Arnold and Mabel came. I had gone along to this dinner. I was there because I was a chemist and because I was on the research board, which is I could tell Arnold about what the research board did and so on. So Arnold eventually did decide to give money. His argument was, look, I don't see why I should give money to a public university. I love the Illinois, but the people of Illinois should support this place. Why are you asking me for this money? And their argument was, well, the research board is different. You know, we can't get much out of the budget. We can't get the state to put money in that, but the value of it for the faculty and those who get the money is great. So he was finally convinced that he could do something, but he was still very leery about it. So instead of giving them 10 million, he gave them 5 million. And it came in the form of $2.5 million worth of Beckman stock and 2,000 acres of land up near Cullum. That was valued at 2.5 million. So the two pieces together made 5 million. And he said, you have to give that other 5 million from somebody else. And they managed to find the other $5 million. So in 1980, that's when that gift was announced. And Lou Barron, who was the director of the University of Illinois Foundation, was a very clever and strategically minded person. He knew that this was the first wedge. He wasn't about to let Arnold get away with that kind of money, So he had all this money, which had just occurred to him because he had merged his company with SmithKline to form SmithKline Beckman. And so he was being flown back and forth between California and Philadelphia by corporation jets. And he could get off at Champaign-Urbana and stay overnight, have the jet wait for him, and then go on. And he liked being on the campus. And when he came, I made it a point to arrange a schedule for him. So we were using some of his money to make special grants, Beckman grants to the faculty in the science, not only in the sciences, but in some of the other fields. And then I arranged for him to go to the offices and labs of these people. I'd go with him, and we'd meet these guys, and they would tell Arnold what they were doing. Oh God, he loved that, So he wanted to do these things, and we would go around. I think, for example, Jerry Jonas might have gotten one of those back in those days, and I remember going to Jerry's lab, and he was telling him all about these high pressure NMR measurements he was doing. So all of that happened, and you know what it was doing. I can't say that I was smart enough to be strategic about it. I just wanted him to be happy that he'd given us the money. But what was happening was that we were building in his mind, a sense of trust about the campus and about the university. And he really liked what was going on. That sort of was the beginning of a relationship that kept getting more and more intense as time went by.
So in the proposal for the Beckman Institute, was the idea of an interdisciplinary research institute your idea, or was that developed in partnership with Arnold, or was it Arnold's idea? Talk about how that came to be.
It wasn't his idea. The whole point about making a proposal to Arnold Beckman was that he still adhered to this notion that he wasn't going to give money for a new chemistry building. I mean, that was not what he loved chemistry, but that was the state's job and not his job. And Lou Barron was a cagey, smart guy. He said, look, he didn't say Arnold's name at all. He could have had other alumni in mind as well. But we met with Mort Weir and Ned Goldwasser and John Cribbett and I. And he said, it's up to you guys. What we need from you is a proposal for something that's really different. I don't know what it would be, but it's up to you to think of it. But it's got to be something that the state of Illinois isn't going to do. So put your minds to it, and it should be big. We want some big ideas here. So he went away back to the foundation's office. And these other guys turned to me and said, well, Ted, you're the vice chancellor for research. Why don't you think of something? So because John Cribbett and Ned and I were formed what we called the Troika. We met all the time. This was a really nice relationship. He was the chancellor. Ned was the vice chancellor for academic affairs, and I was the vice chancellor for research. I started just doodling, and then I suggested that we form a couple of committees, one on the life and behavioral sciences side, and the other on the engineering and physical sciences side, and turn these guys loose and say, what could you do if you had a lot of money to make a center? What would it look like? Who would be in it? How would you interact with one another, and so on? So those two committees were formed, and eventually Carl Hesbit chaired one, and Bill Greeno chaired the other. And I gave them a charter. I think that's in that book that I wrote about the
Bridging Divides.
Yeah, Bridging the Divides. So it's in there, the charter that I gave them. And it was a broad charter. I wanted them to really think broadly. Some of the faculty that went on there originally quit after a couple of meetings and said, oh, this is a waste of my time. Nothing's going to happen from this. And so they gave up. But Carl and Bill kept at it, and I kept going to meetings and trying to encourage them. So eventually, we did get 2 reports out of it.
Did you get a sense that the faculty were that there was a group of faculty that really subscribed to this idea?
Some did. Some people were just naturally inclined in that direction, even if they weren't doing it themselves at the moment. They could see the advantages. And mostly at that stage too, it wasn't so matter about how would you actually do it, but from an intellectual point of view, if you were going to do it, who would you do it with? You know, how do you make these connections? Which groups would naturally form with others, and how would it look that way? And so the reports were very much organized to sort of along those lines. And then when the word got out that these committees were doing this, some of the other groups on campus thought, damn it, they didn't ask us what we thought, so they started submitting rogue reports. I had 2 or 3 big packages. So then we got those reports, and we then played around with them, fiddled around with them for a long time, and worked with Bill and Carl, and Mort and I worked on that way of diagramming it. That Mort really was responsible for making that little triangle.
Oh,
thing.
that's interesting.
So that became a kind of a logo for us, and it's so easy to represent things that way. So we began to use that successfully to talk about it.
I'm curious, besides the momentum was clearly building from your description, but were there also some naysayers who kind of thought this is a crazy lunatic idea? We must be able to spend that kind of money better in other directions.
Well, they didn't start thinking that until the money was there to talk about. But as far as the actual putting together of the proposals, some of them said, "Are you nuts? Anybody who gets in that sort of stuff is not a first-rate scientist. You can't be that way and be a first-rate scientist. You got to plug." But on the other hand, there were people like David Pines and others who thought it was great, and so we had a whole spectrum of people. So we went back and kept working on it, and we went back to them. I didn't want to get to the point where we didn't have the support of the senior people on the campus, the senior scientists and so forth. And so in the end, when we had put all that stuff together and polished it up, the proposal that went to him in '84, in the summer of '84, was for $50 million.
This is Arnold who got it, right?
Arnold got it.
Let's talk a little bit about the building. First of all, the choice of its location, and then maybe you can talk a little bit about the design thinking that went into it with this idea of interdisciplinary in mind.
Well, the choice of land, where to put it, that corner at the corner of Wright and University was where the first university building had been built. And the Illinois Industrial University was on that site. And so it had historical importance. And that was kind of a hook. But besides that, we didn't know where else to put it. If you wanted to give yourself plenty of room for space, because this was going to be big, right? Once the choice had been made that he had given us some money, and then he had given us 40 million, we asked for 50, and the state was required to put in another 10. So we had a $50 million project. That was a hell of a big building at that time. So as soon as the decision was made to build the building there, then they hired the Sasaki and Company to come in and do a master plan for the North Campus. And they went in with a vengeance to design that whole North Campus. And Stan Eichenberg was very strong on this. He really wanted to see this. I mean, he thought we have something here that we can do to create a whole new campus. This is going to be a new thing.
I'm curious about the design of the building. When did that start? When did you start imagining it? And you write about it in the book, but maybe you can talk a little bit about how that came to be, because it really broke tradition. I mean, in your book, for example, you write about how the laboratory was going to be separated from faculty offices.
Yeah.
And this was quite a revolutionary idea at the time, right? And it was, but it was in purpose. It was intentionally done. That's
right. We realized that if we were going to really do something different, we had to break the mold of the traditional laboratory fiefdom thing, where you had these little silos. Professor X has his office surrounded by laboratories which are occupied by students and postdocs, and then there's a boundary, and the next section over is Jones's kingdom and so forth. And so we wanted to break that, and we wanted it to be such that the faculty spent time with one another, learning from one another, which they don't like to do typically. So we put them all next to one another in these offices. The whole thing was designed to encourage people to interact with one another, faculty with faculty, faculty with their students. On the other side, the graduate students were also in spaces which mixed research groups together. And so it was all designed to kind of mix people up as much as possible, to make the bridges a place where people could meet. Yeah, you'd be surprised how much granularity we put into thinking about these things. Those bridges, for example, should they have chalkboards on the wall? Well, at first we didn't put them up, and then we decided later, or somebody did, that we should have them there. But places to sit. And you asked me the question in the letter you wrote me about, what about the Beckman Cafe? This was something that Bill Greeno and I both really felt strongly about. We both felt that we needed to have a cafe in that building. Bill had experience someplace else with a building with a cafe, and he said, it works. We know it works. And
it works in what way? Can you expand on that?
It brought people together. People love to eat, they like to drink, and depending on what kind of provisions you make for them, it doesn't take that much to get them to come together. And then what happened too, which was good, it brought over people from other buildings. We used to have a lot of civil engineers who came up there to use that thing, and then later on, some of the people from the Coordinated Sciences Laboratory, whatever that lab is called, that's right next to us there. And now I suppose people from the EE, although they probably have their own restaurant over there now. But this was an idea new for its time, and it brought people together in interesting ways, and it created I don't know, even if people didn't use it, there was this feeling of hominess about it, that this was a place that you could actually live in,
I think what you realize when you sit down and have a casual conversation with someone who's outside of your discipline is that, eventually you find the common ground. And you may not get there so easily if you're too focused on, a conversation that has a purpose that's very specific in mind, as opposed to a casual. I think that the term I've heard used is interdisciplinary socialization, and that socialization component of getting two people from very far apart is, I think, very important to the success of collaborations.
Well, I could feel that when we first moved in, we got people started, because most of these people didn't know very many people outside of their own group, really. That's what it came to. So I had these brown bag lunches once a week, I think they were, and there would be 10 or 12 faculty, and then everyone went around the table and spent a few minutes telling who they were and what kind of things they were interested in. And by the time you do that with 10 people, you've used up your lunch hour. But there were times when you could see that bells were ringing. I can remember a couple of incidents where somebody, for example, from electrical engineering was interested in signal processing. I've forgotten the guy's name now, and might have been Al Feng or somebody else who was across the way. He said, "Holy hell, I do that." How do you tell one frog from another? And the guy said, "What do you mean make one frog from another?" And they were actually ended up spending a lot of time talking, maybe even collaborating. And it's that kind of realization that we're treading on sort of common ground in a lot of areas. And it was really fun for me to learn about these things from the people. And I think that it helped people to interact.
Being present is really what makes those opportunities to where people meet and come together and the ideas are born.
Yeah.
You also had an interesting policy that you talked about related to this in the book, and I think that it met with some resistance from what I was able to read. Maybe you can expand on the idea that you won't have tenure in Beckman and that your time there is limited. And what was the thinking that went into that policy, and how was it received?
The Beckman Institute is an organic structure, and you can't have situations where people are entitled stay in place and have an organic structure. There always has to be that sense that I'm here because I have some purpose that serves the function of the building at large. And I will have to say that this was a very hard idea to get across. When I left the office at the end of 5 years, Jeff, and I could see that we had actually not done very well. We had a lot of good ideas, a lot of good programs. There were almost no major interdisciplinary collaborative efforts of consequence size. You know, people were still they're being interdisciplinary within their own little group. What I wanted was something bigger than that. I wanted, if you think about it in terms of steps, what's the distance between this idea and this one? If you're 2 feet apart, if you're 150 feet apart, that's interesting, right?
Right.
That's what you have to measure. What is the gap there, and how hard is it to close it? When I was finishing up my time, I realized that we needed to do had to need to get really strong about evaluating these programs. They were doing good science individually, but were they actually doing what we wanted them to do? Couldn't they be doing that just as well back home as in the Beckman Institute? So we started planning for the first set of evaluations. And so we laid out, by the time I left, I'd had a committee working on it. We had a program evaluation thing lined up. And then Jerry Jonas came in, and it became his responsibility to execute that. Now, that's the hard part, of course, making it work. And I have to say that Jerry did he did a magnificent job in two ways. First of all, he was tough, and he laid out a very firm plan of how to evaluate these things. And he was tough about acting on that and telling some people that they would have to leave. But thirdly, he realized that it isn't enough to just get tough. We have to teach people how to do this. And that's when he constructed this notion of these thrust areas. And when he said to each one of these thrust people, look, you're in thrust A. You've got to get to know the people in thrust A. And I expect you guys in thrust A to get yourselves together and be able to go out to DARPA or this place or that place that's offering a $5 or $10 million grant and put in a proposal. If you can't do that, you're not doing your job. He knew how to do this. He was a really tough guy, and he executed. I might have done it too if I'd been able to stay around, but there's a certain point at which you use up your capital, as it were, and it wasn't for me to do that. But Jerry did that. I couldn't have predicted almost anything that's going on in the Beckman Institute right now. And when I look back on it, it is because the Beckman Institute has been an organically developing organization. How does it develop organically? Well, that's all because of people, one way or another. Circumstances play a role, whether there's money for this or that and so on. But, when you go from one field, when you go from one line of emphasis to another, some people have to leave, others come in. People are making bets. They're making bets on the future. They're making bets about the intellectual quality of what goes on there. And they're thinking, what can I do with what I have here to make this work? And what can I do to find the right people or to pick the right directions in which to say, this is when we hire, this is the area we want to hire into. It's a long ways off, but this is where we ought to go. We've got to think about how to live 20 years from now. How are we going to prepare for what life is going to be like 20 years from now? And it's going to be altogether different. We're going to have people living in cities. So if I were in the Beckman Institute and the director, I would start thinking about things like, I need to get in touch with architects and see what they can do to talk about what the city of the future will look like and bring people in who do this. I would talk about people, get to talk about people in AI and ask them, what is the future for human-like robots? And how can you imagine a future in which robots do all these things? And what about food? Imagine a world in which we don't use all that farmland for growing food anymore. It's now given back to grasslands. We raise all of the food in the cities. We do everything by vertical farming. Neurosciences, which is understanding more and more about how we are made and how we react to the world. And we're learning more about that all the time. These are all things that's just off the top of my head thinking.
I really liked how you framed the idea the jury brought, and this idea that we need people to come together as teams. And it really started, I think, this whole emphasis in that, there's much more than the sum of the individuals when you bring a group of people together who really, you actually touched on a key word that Arnold, you said, had begun to get trust with Illinois. And I think that, it's not just some effort to assemble the team, but that team, those team members must begin to build the trust so that they can freely share ideas and exchange ideas. And that was really the point of my last question about how we can recognize that there's a bigger win when we all come together.
Well, don't you think the important things that are being done these days, many of them are not being done by individuals who couldn't possibly do them by themselves? There will be the continuous outstanding person who does something, and if we want them to do that, they could do it in the context of a place like the Beckman Institute. But that's not the measure. The measure is what does the place itself as an organic whole, what does it do? If it produces, for example, you've got that College of Medicine there, and now it looks like the Beckman Institute is becoming, a powerful force in that. And if they're successful, and if they don't drift away too much from a goal of working collaboratively to accomplish a lot of these things that you want to do, it can become, a terrific thing. And that's what we should be known for.
Well, Ted, I'm going to wrap this up, but I really want to say how impactful your legacy has been on the campus of the University of Illinois, but even stretches far beyond that, because, if you just look at the history of interdisciplinary institutes, you can really see that there was a major shift that took place after the Beckman Institute had been established. And it had brought a lot of recognition in its early days for being so unique in that context. And so, as I go around, one of my favorite slogans is "Everybody wants to be like Ted." And, it truly is. I mean, we all look back and hope to have a legacy like the one that you have had at the University of Illinois. And I really appreciate the time, the insight. Maybe we'll have to do this again, because I think there's a lot more to the story than what I was able to get out of.
Well, there are a lot of it. Everybody wants to be interdisciplinary these days, and that's good. If we manage to see that, even though nobody recognizes that we were one of the pioneers in it, but
everybody wants to be the game changer. What's going to move the needle? And I just look at the Beckman Institute and I say, that's it right there. How do you reproduce that? How do you do that again? If you can do that once in 50 years, I think it's going to be really that is what the university will be sustained by.
If you don't look at the world outside, if you just stick yourself in the middle of academia and think, well, what do we do here? You're going to miss it. What you have to look at is the world that's coming. It's changing right around us, and you can't say you're not affected by it. And 10 years from now, God knows what we're going to have. But what can we do to try to help humanity find its way out of these messes? And there are things here to think about and to ponder upon when you're running a place like the Beckman Institute.
I think this is a great place to land the conversation.
Yeah.
But Ted, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to me. And I think that, it's going to be really a lot of interest to hear from your mouth the words of how, what we all walk into every day and take for granted, or at least when COVID is over, walk back into every day. And we've somewhat taken it for granted, but clearly there was just, a lot of behind the scenes thought and effort and hours of meetings that really helped to build that trust and take the Beckman Institute to plant it and to grow it up like it has. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I really appreciate the opportunity. It's been very gratifying for me to talk with you today.